Hello and welcome to the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm Sean Zerillo, joined today by Billy Ward. We're going to help you break down UFC Vegas 87 at the Apex Center in Las Vegas, Nevada. Got to be clear off the bat, this is not a good card, folks. This is probably the worst card I've seen from the UFC in a few years, but that doesn't mean we don't have things to bet on. However, this is also a very difficult betting card. A lot of favorites, minus 300 or higher. One of the most heavily juiced favorite cards I've seen in quite some time as well. And in the past 2 weeks, past two UFC cards, favorites outside of the co-main and main events are 25 and up. So expecting to see the favorite streak continue here. Maybe there's some underdog that we're going to find who we like to upset their opponent at odds this weekend. And Billy, we're going to start things off with the main event. Jairzinho Rozenstruik against Shamil Gaziev. Rozenstruik been 5 rounds on a couple of occasions, secured a knockout late in the 5th round in one of his fights as well. Gaziev, I believe, has never been out of his second round in his professional career. He is the big favorite in this matchup. Not a big favorite in this matchup, but sitting around minus 175 to minus 185. Some books yesterday, he was closer to minus 150, minus 165. So this number has actually gotten bet up a little bit. The over under 1.5 sitting at plus money to the over. Gaziev, as I said, does tend to finish his opponents pretty quickly, but Rozenstruik is good at surviving and good at sort of delaying the fight, stalling the fight out until he's able to get it a little bit deeper. And even though his cardio, his durability isn't quite what it used to be as he continues to age, he's definitely a better striker in this matchup. He's the more powerful striker in this matchup. And if this is on the feet for any extended stretch of time, I think he's absolutely going to be live to pull the upset. Really powerful leg kicks, very powerful hands. And I think he has the cardio advantage too. Gaziev is going to be trying for takedowns early. He might get them. He's probably going to get them in the first round. But I don't necessarily think he's going to finish Jairzinho. His Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu nowhere near on the level of a guy like Almeida, who's able to quickly finish Jairzinho. Doesn't have the same knockout power as a guy like Francis Ngannou, who again was able to quickly finish Jairzinho. But he's probably going to get top position, and he's going to be able to threaten to finish this fight early. I just think Jairzinho is going to be able to survive for those 5 minutes, get it to the second round, get it back on the feet, and then potentially look at for a knockout from there. I'm going to be looking to live bet Jairzinho live after round 1, maybe live after round 2 as well. The longer this fight goes, I think the better it should play out for him. Just considering, we've seen Gaziev extended once, went to a split decision, and did not look good doing so, and that was just a couple of years ago. So Gaziev, the pre-fight justifiable favorite, going to be targeting a live bet on Jairzinho Rozenstruik after round 1, after round 2. In terms of a bet, I do like the over 1.5. Was able to find as high as plus 165 if you shop around. So make sure to shop for the best number because you can find as low as plus 135 and as high as plus 165. Billy, I believe you have the same read on this fight as me. You also like it to go longer, and you're actually considering it to go the distance.
Yeah, I was really glad to see you were seeing the same thing I was with that. It's just Jairzinho Rozenstruik, he's got big power and he can knock people out, but he's not looking for it right away. He's not rushing forward, trying to throw bombs. And I feel like we have this narrative that Gaziev is this like young prospect that the UFC is trying to build up. He's like 18 months younger than Jairzinho Rozenstruik. So that doesn't really lend too much credence to the, this old withered fighter who's on his last legs against this young prospect. They're both 35 and 36. Like it's similar. The other thing that I think it's almost like we're assuming, we being the general market, that Gaziev is going to take him down and just dominate him on the ground. And I think that's just because he's from Dagestan. I don't think there's really anything on his record in or outside of the UFC that suggests that. Like, no takedown attempts or takedowns in his Contender Series fight, although he won it by submission, but that's because his opponent wrestled. Standing TKO in his first UFC fight. Most of his wins on his record are knockouts. I don't know that we see this massive grappling advantage because he's fighting some guys no one's ever heard of in random regional shows when he's got those submissions. So yeah, I'm with you. It's partially a bet on both guys respecting the power of each other, playing it at a distance, kind of taking their time. And it's partially a bet on just this one being closer than people think it's going to be. I don't see Gaziev as just rolling right through someone. Rozenstruik was a UFC main eventer before Gaziev ever had like an amateur MMA fight, like much less a pro fight. Like this is a massive step up for the young fighter. I see what the UFC is doing here. They're trying to make him a thing just because they need anybody at heavyweight to make the division interesting. I don't think Rozenstruik's at that point in his career yet where we can just build stars off of his name. So love the over 1.5, as you mentioned. Small sprinkle on goes to decision at plus 750. The thought on that is if it goes over 1.5 and we get into the third, fourth rounds, They're just some big boys. They get tired. They're just leaning on each other against the fence for the final 10 or 15 minutes. Obviously, would prefer to only have 3 rounds to deal with if we're making that bet, but just as a fun sprinkle on what you mentioned, it's not a great betting card. I'm going to answer the question that Brendan would be asking here. We say it's a bad fight card to watch. This one's also kind of a bad one to bet with all the heavy favorites. So on a card like this where we don't have a lot to look at, yeah, I'll take a little sprinkle at plus 750.
You interested live at all on Jairzinho?
A little bit. I kind of want to see how it goes. We talked about it with a couple fighters last week. Like, one guy we know he's got good cardio in Jairzinho. Gaziev, we don't know that he has bad cardio necessarily. It's just more of a question mark. So that's one of those that I'm not going to come in with the plan on that. But if I see something with it, it's going to be more of a read and react as the situation goes. And with this one starting at like noon Eastern time, I'll be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for that one. So it's a better live betting spot than some of these that finish at 1 a.m.
Yeah, the Mexico City card, the way the cardio played out last week, kind of interesting. It seemed like fighters who normally tire were not tiring quicker or more than they normally do, but the fighters who normally have good cardio seem to be tiring out just as much as the guys who tire. So the cardio dynamics of those fights kind of played out very interesting. This UFC card on Saturday does start, as Billy mentioned, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So got to get those bets in early and at least get to enjoy some of these fights during the daytime. Can still go out and enjoy your night. Now, number of underdogs on this card, as we mentioned. Going to see if we could find one that we want to play in a minute. I have one that I like here at our fight of the night between Muhammad Mokaev and Alex Perez. Billy, I saw on your luck ratings earlier this week, you mentioned Mokaev. It told people to get on him early. His line jumped substantially from minus 250 to minus 350, something like that. I mean, a huge move. I see him sitting as high as minus 375 now, open closer to minus 275. At this price, I think it's getting a little bit disrespectful towards Alex Perez. Plus 300 or better, I'm probably going to have to jump in on Perez. Alex Perez has only lost to the best of the best. Davison Figueiredo, Joseph Benavidez, guys who are champions, and Alexander Pantoja. He was considered by many to be the best flyweight in the world for a little bit, and he took that fight with Figueiredo on short notice, which kind of scars his run and his ascension up the flyweight rankings. One big issue with this guy is problems making weight, and we need to see weigh-ins and how he does today because he struggles to make 125 pounds. He's pulled out of a number of fights, either where he didn't make weight or where he wasn't going to make weight leading up to the fight and just sort of canceled the bout. And he's also had opponents pull out on him too. I believe in the past 2 or 3 years, Perez has 10 canceled bouts and 2 actual fights. And those fights did not go particularly long either. That said, I think he's the more skilled fighter at this stage of his career. He's the better striker. I think he's the better wrestler. Mokaev is the better submission grappler. Perez, for all of his skills, tends to have a fault in getting submitted. Now, the thing with Mokaev, and the reason why I think he's going to lose eventually, he's trailing on his scorecards in his past 2 fights. He gets takedowns. He has a very aggressive style. He's really good at sticking to opponents and controlling opponents, but he doesn't land any ground and pound. And in terms of judges' optics, the Victor Altamirano fight last week, you have to actually do something with the takedowns now at this level, at this in MMA scoring in 2024. You don't get away with just getting takedowns and holding position or threatening a submission. You actually need to land strikes and do damage. And as a result of that, even though Mokaev was having success in his last 2 fights, he needed to finish them or he would have lost on scorecards to Malcolm Gordon and Tim Elliott. Both of those fighters were ahead at the time Mokaev finished them. So I like Perez here on the money line. I like him by decision at plus 600. I think if this fight goes to decision, I'd probably favor him to win. And I would, for that reason, probably look to bet him in decision-only markets too. Mokaev is getting there, but he just doesn't land enough damage. His knee got shredded 2 fights back. We don't really talk about that much, but I don't really know what the after effects are from, pre-knee injury Muhammad Mokaev versus not tapping to a knee bar and getting his knee completely blown out and continuing to fight through that. I don't think this guy is the same athlete that he was 2 years ago. So somebody's going to beat Muhammad Mokaev eventually. I think if he wins this fight, they're going to try to give him a title fight against Pantoja at UFC 301. I think Pantoja smokes him. But I like Perez to pull the upside on Saturday if he makes weight. And I think do it by decision is pretty good bet as well. So plus 600, Perez by decision. I agree with the early line movement, obviously, that Billy got. But at this point, I think it's just getting a bit too disrespectful towards Alex Perez. Billy, I know you're on the other side here with Mokaev. Tell the people how you break it down differently.
Yeah, I'm not entirely actually. Like I certainly wouldn't play his money line at this point either. I'm considering just arbitraging out and taking, as big plus money as I can get on Perez and just taking my money either way. But couple points to the knee bar less than a year ago. That was against Jafel Filios, not even 2 years ago. But he has fought since then. I think because it was a straight knee bar rather than like a rotational lock, like a heel hook or something twisting, those usually aren't quite as bad. And he seemed super flexible. So you can kind of flexible your way out of that one. Where if you get stuck in a heel hook or anything twisting, it doesn't really matter who you are. Your ligaments can't be flexible, but your knee can. So that one, I'm not as worried about that. He didn't look as good against Tim Elliott, but nobody looks good against Tim Elliott because he's just such a weirdo. I do agree with you with the way he fights, though, he's going to run into someone where that submission doesn't stick, or someone like him who just powers through the submission and lets you take his arm, and that's going to catch up with him. I just don't think that person's Alex Perez. The UFC is trying to make Mokaev a title challenger. They need somebody at 125 because the second best fighters have both already lost to the champ. Perez is kind of one of those perfect matchups. His 3 losses, as you mentioned, were all to top contenders. All 3 losses came on the ground, twice by submission, once by ground and pound. If you're trying to pick, a top 5-ish fighter that will make Muhammad Mokaev look good in the safest way possible, it's probably Alex Perez, honestly, like of all the guys in that range, ranking-wise. And especially after they did him no favors giving him Tim Elliott in the last one, they kind of need to put some shine back on. So with all that said, Mokaev by submission at plus 150, unless he takes a newfound interest in ground and pound, he kind of needs a submission to win. Like that should be considerably closer to his money line for all the reasons you just pointed out. So like that at plus money. Love the Alex Perez decision only line. That's a great read as well. And again, if I had to take a money line side right now, I'd probably be with you on Perez. I think it's close to right now, but probably gone too far in the Mokaev direction.
So just to be clear, this card was originally supposed to take place in Saudi Arabia, so you could see all of these fighters from that region, from the Middle Eastern region, are heavily juiced up on this card and seem to be given, soft, winnable matchups. They were the clear A sides in a card that was supposed to take place in the Middle East. So just worthy of consideration. But yeah, I just think the pricing on this fight has blown out a little bit too far. And I think Alex Perez certainly the value side of plus 290. I'll probably wait for plus 300. It looks like it will get there. Let's move on to our favorite underdogs of the card. Obviously, I just talked about Alex Perez. I think there's 2 underdogs, though, worth actually targeting that are closer to a pick'em fight. Billy's going to talk about one of them, so I will not spoil it. But just note, I show, how I project these fights. I show value on 2 underdogs on this card. One of them is the one Billy's going to talk about. I'm going to leave the fight breakdown to him. I will talk about Bernardo Sopai, who's going to be making his UFC debut here. This fight against Vinicius Oliveira, both of these guys, debutants, this is what I would bet to be the fight of the night. I know we just talked about Mokaev and Perez being the fight of the night. That's the fight with the most implications for future rankings. Mokaev may get a title shot, or Perez could even get a title shot off of a win in that matchup. Oliveira and Sopai is going to be nuts. And Vinicius Oliveira is a guy who's probably going to win a lot of performance bonuses in the UFC if he sticks around. Very aggressive, no defense. And he has a big size advantage in this fight. And that's the one angle that I'm a bit skeptical about betting Sopai here, especially right now, prior to weigh-ins. The line has come in drastically. I mean, Sopai was as high as plus 115, plus 125, even higher than that, plus 130, I think. Came down to a pick'em last night. I think it may blow out again because Oliveira is 4 inches taller, has a 4-inch reach advantage. When these two line up at weigh-ins, I think he's just going to look noticeably bigger. And even though he's the more aggressive fighter, I think Sopai is just a much more technical man and trains at All-Star MMA in Sweden. Same gym as, Hamzat Chimaev, really well trained. I think he's going to have the better game plan. I think he's going to be calmer. I may actually like him from a live betting perspective because I think he may lose the first round and work his way back into the fight. But in terms of guys I would consider betting at plus money this weekend where I think have a chance, to pull off the upset, obviously the shortest underdog on the card, Bernardo Sopai, but I actually think he is the value side worth betting in the fight. And I have I have projections that make him a 50% bet in this fight or even a slight favorite. So Sopai for me, the underdog I may end up playing. Billy, you're going to go with Loic Rajabanov, who's actually a fighter that you made your best bet against, I believe, in his last fight.
That's true. Wow, that is an incredible callback because I was
Yeah.
going to reference that, but didn't think
We
anyone
talk
would.
about Mateusz Rambecki too much. He just sticks in my mind.
There you go. But yeah, so that's a big part of it is we've seen Rajabov twice in the UFC. Once he got 11 takedowns, got clipped in there, but mostly cruised to a unanimous decision over Esteban Ribovic. That win has aged well because Ribovic went out and looked really good in his follow-up fight. And I just think Rambecki is really good. Like, Rambecki smashed him. I took him in under 2.5, cashed pretty easily at plus money in that fight. But I think that says more about Rambecki than Radzhabov, who I'm pretty high on as well. He's fighting Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi. He's a Contender Series fighter. Al-Sawadi was a big underdog on the Contender Series like 4 or 5 months ago against George Hardwick, who I thought was ridiculously overrated in that spot.
Plus 340.
So it was that, yeah. I couldn't remember exactly how high it was,
Yeah,
but I knew it was significant. I think that says more about Hardwick being a little bit overvalued than it was like, oh, wow, Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi's so good. He won a decision, but it wasn't like crazy impressive. Outstruck him by 15 and got 1 takedown. That's at the Contender Series, right? Like, I don't think this is going to compare the same way. So then looking at Radzhabov's record, is Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi closer in ability level to Esteban Ribovic, or is he closer to Mateusz Rambecki? I think that's a pretty easy question to answer in that it's generous to say he's closer to Ribovic than it is, a fair comparison. So getting the kind of plus money we are on Radzhabov, I think it's actually increased just a little bit throughout the week too. It's moved up and down at different points, but yeah, I really like that at the price we're seeing now. Plus 160. Don't really have a particular method of victory. I could see a knockout. He's, kind of a short, stocky guy with some big power, but also likes takedown. So plus 160 is enough for me. I don't feel the need to reach on any kind of method of victory. Are you seeing anything else on that one that you wanted to add?
So the projections say over. Their chins, to me, tend to lean under. Radzhabov knocked out 6 months ago. Karim Al-Sawadi has been knocked out 3 times in his career. Normally 155 pounders with knockouts on their records regionally. I get a little bit skeptical at the UFC level that they can handle the power. But I do like Radzhabov, especially Radzhabov pre-fight. And I think you could maybe live bet out of it with Al-Sawadi after round 1. The one angle that concerns me is the cardio. I think Al-Sawadi has the cardio advantage. But I favor Radzhabov to win the first round and to land takedowns and to land the harder strikes. So pre-fight, absolutely want to be on Radzhabov. I think live, I might tend to buy out a little bit on Al-Sawadi after round 1. And then, yeah, I lean to the fight. My projections say to lean to the fight going to a decision. Radzhabov winning by decision, but my read on it says somebody gets finished. And honestly, I think Radzhabov is more finishing upside. So if I'm betting the underdog, I don't want to bet the over 2 because I think those are sort of going against one another. So yeah, Radzhabov and the under by knockout is where I'd probably lean in terms of a visual read on it. Just 155 pounds knockouts regionally, it just doesn't translate well. So
yeah, and Radzhabov is not built like a guy who you would expect to have good cardio, which isn't to say that we know he has bad cardio, because there's someone I'm going to talk about later on in this card, people we've talked about in fights past, are like, sometimes that doesn't matter, but usually these short, stocky, super muscular guys, you don't really think of them as cardio machines. So I think that's probably a fair read. In this card, like, given all the variance and how little we know about these guys, almost any spot, or if I can get plus money on both sides with a live bet, like, I'm just going to take it on this one. Let's not overthink this one and try to get too cute and thread the needle on all these perfect spots. Like, if you can lock in a profit at any point in these, I would strongly recommend going for it.
Yeah, the last thing I want to mention, just in regards to Radzhabov's cardio, he doesn't have great control. You see that that win over Ribovic, he had to shoot 21 takedowns. When you land 11 takedowns, it's great, but also that means that your opponent probably got up 8 times. So seeing a lot of takedowns for a fighter like that Merab style, only so many fighters can keep that Merab pace of shooting, 5 takedowns around, 10 takedowns around. Eventually, guys do fall off a cliff. So, yeah, not everybody can maintain that style. Curious to see how that first round goes, but I think it should favor Radzhabov. Let's talk about our favorite props on the card. I bet 4 totals on this card so far. I've not bet a single money line yet. We did talk about some fighters I may bet on the money line. Just want to see where the prices go prior to fight time. But in terms of the totals that I like in this card, I saved one for best bet. We're going to talk about 2 other ones right now. Umar Nurmagomedov against his opponent. I don't want to mess up this name, but this guy's a debutant. Beskat Almakhan. Almacan had some stuff come out yesterday that is very interesting. We've had fighters in the UFC in the past who have had fraudulent records. Almacan seemed like he might be a guy who has a fraudulent record. If you watched any tape on him this week, or if you don't watch tape and you just want a funny tidbit, I saw some tweets this week, like laugh crying emojis. You know, the tape on Almacan. Can't wait to watch it. They're literally fighting on like rugs inside of like a mat. I mean, it's like Persian rugs inside of like a matted area. I've never seen fights set up like this. So Sherdog investigated his fights, his records, and they actually found that this guy might be more legit than his record indicates. He has a 17-1 record. They had to take a few fights off of his win-loss record. I believe he's now coming in at 14-1 officially. But that's just because some of the fights he was competing in were not official MMA fights. It was a different like subset of rules, and they can't officially qualify it under MMA rules. That said, he is a winner over Sergey Morozov. That is not on his record officially. It makes him like an even more legitimate fighter than he already seemed to be based on the film. So Umar Nurmagomedov, you know, probably the best 135 pounder on the planet, maybe. Certainly has, you know, an argument to being so based on the skills we've seen so far. He looks phenomenally talented. I think he will have the belt eventually, or at least compete for it at some point in the future. Maybe a fight with Merab down the line, potentially lining those two up. But a minus 1,200 prohibitive favorite on this card. That's the best price available. I actually like this fight to be a little bit more competitive than that line would indicate, though. The over 1.5 rounds at minus 160 would bet that up to about minus 180. Umar is odd because he has some quick finishes on his record, but he also has Piotr Yan disease, where he doesn't necessarily engage his opponents for the first 3 or 4 minutes of the fight. He likes to get his reads, approach his opponents patiently, and then sort of go to work. And as a result of that, time ticking away, it just lends itself more to the over cashing. So based on the money line, based on, you know, the short notice nature of his opponent, who has like a quote unquote fraudulent record, you would think Umar would finish him, you know, on the first exchange. I actually think this is going to be more competitive. And I think Bekzat has the potential to be one of these guys who overachieves against the huge favorite. And then he's heavily favored in his next fight, and we have to bet against him. So Nurmagomedov, Almacan over 1.5 at minus 160. And then another short notice debutant on this card, AJ Cunningham. Again, Ludovic Klein minus 900, minus 1,000, depending on the book. Cunningham got destroyed on Contender Series, and he's a kid with a very sympathetic story. Awful childhood. I think he's Bryce Mitchell's cousin, so there's some connections to trying to get him to the UFC. But based on his Contender Series fight, this kid has no business sniffing the UFC. He's coming in as a short notice replacement here. I think Klein head kick knocks him out in the first round, puts him in serious danger. The one thing with Cunningham is he's super durable, like too tough for his own good. I would hope the ref does not give him too much leeway, considering this is a fight that probably shouldn't even be sanctioned. And Ludovic Klein is like a legitimate top, 25 fighter in his division. So Klein, Cunningham under 1.5, you can get that at plus money, like that to about minus 110. I think Klein finishes him in the first half of the fight.
Yeah, so real quick on the Umar stuff, I'm glad you mentioned the Sergey Morozov. Morozov was beating Umar, and then I believe it was a guillotine that he tapped to that I was like screaming at the TV wasn't on. Please don't tap to this. This is not a real submission. Like, you're okay. Didn't work out that way. And then Morozov got cut despite like having a fairly good UFC run in there, which I thought was weird. I don't understand why that happened. I wouldn't even hate, like, this is obviously, not financial advice, but little sprinkle on Almacan money line just in case something crazy happens at that odds. Again, we're just trying to have fun on this card, guys. This is not the best betting spot we have. But to go to my callback about, guys don't look like they should have cardio but do, Vitor Petrino, he's got 4 fights under the UFC banner, including the Contender Series, 2 second-round wins, 2 second-round finishes, a third-round finish, dominant decision. You can get him in round 2 at plus 400, round 3 at plus 800 to fight Tyson Pedro. Tyson Pedro is 10-4 as a pro, has never won a fight that went longer than 5 minutes. Both guys got big power, but I think the easiest path to victory here for Petrino is just to take Pedro down, make him carry his weight, gas him out in the first round, then look for the finish later. Pedro is, in theory, a BJJ black belt, and he looks good for like brief stretches of grappling, But every time somebody takes the grappling to him, he is just totally gassed out after that. You can tell he has a kickboxing background. That's what he likes to do. He's comfortable moving around on the feet. He gets in those wrestling exchanges, the gas tank just drains immediately. So if I'm Petrino or Petrino's coaches, whatever, it's let's take him down for the first round. Don't work too hard for a finish. Just wear him out, second and third round. Get pretty good prices on those. Think even higher at some other books if you shop around, but plus 400, plus 800, about a quarter unit on each, more than enough for me.
Yeah, Petrino, the clear A side of this fight to me, the better prospect, and 6 years younger. So the UFC is going to be trying to push him, move him up the rankings. They gave it a shot with Tyson Pedro. He's probably better suited for the WWE than the UFC. Moving on to our best bets. I'm going with another over 1.5 here, minus 110. I like it up to about minus 125. Christopher Leroy Duncan, CLD against Claudio Ribeiro. Duncan is the better striker, but he's a bit of a karate guy. And when they are at striking range, he's going to try to be at distance, or he's going to try to be all the way in clinching up. Ribeiro throws a lot of power, does not have much cardio, really going to fall off a cliff in the second half of the fight. And I think Duncan either finishes in the latter half of the fight or wins a pretty clear decision. But at range, I think Duncan is going to be staying as far away as possible, trying to kick him across the cage or jab him, or he's going to be clinching him up against the fence, trying to exhaust him, tiring him out, and they're going to be switching positions. I can see a lot of stalling time in this fight, a lot of time ticking off the clock. And frankly, if somebody finishes it in the first 7.5 minutes, I think it's likelier to be Ribeiro with a big power shot where he just catches Duncan. So Duncan Ribeiro over 1.5 at a pick'em price. As I said, I like that up to about minus 125. Billy, you're going with a fighter to win inside the distance as your best bet this week.
I am, yeah. It's just, this is more, it's not even like a technical read. It's just I can't believe the difference between his money line and his inside the distance. And that's Eric Anders, who's coming up around like minus 500 in some spots now. Not quite, but getting there. And then plus 130, plus 135, depending on where you look inside the distance against Jamie Pickett. Anders has finished more than half of his UFC wins. He's finished 4 out of 7. And Pickett is, to put it mildly, not really UFC level. He's on a 4-fight losing streak. He's been finished in 3 of those. We'll give him a pass losing to Bo Nickel. Like in theory, based on how long it lasted, he actually did better against Bo Nickel than anyone else did.
Bo Nickel grabbed the fence, didn't you see? Didn't you see Jamie Pickett's tweets about Bo grabbing the fence?
Wasn't that the one where Bo kneed him in the groin as well? I believe that was the same fight. And like, cool, like he might have and probably did, but you weren't beating Bo Nickel anyway. That's not why that was happening. But anyway, I digress. He's also been submitted by Kyle Dawkins, who Eric Anders beat in a grappling match, and Kyle's long since out of the UFC. Danis Tialulian, who I probably said that wrong, who went 1-4 in the UFC. Only win was against Jamie Pickett, and he finished it. And then he went to the distance against Josh Fremd in his last one. Good for him, but the man's on an 0-4 streak. And I thought, well, Eric Anders has been around a long time. Maybe Pickett's getting better. That last one looked better than it had been before. I can kind of see if that's why. They're like 14 months apart in age, with Anders is only slightly older. So I don't think Anders plays with his food here. He's 1-3 in his last 4. Like, he's just going to get it done kind of by whatever he wants. He's a better athlete, former football player, University of Alabama. Believe some NFL experience, like practice squad or something like that. Better athlete, better takedowns, hits harder. Really the only path here for Pickett is like dancing around for 15 minutes and trying to jab him to death, which Anders is just going to football tackle him and fix that anyway. So this one should be a lot closer to the minus 500 or so money line. Wouldn't take that money line on an unreliable guy like Anders, but getting plus money for him to finish makes total sense. And then Anders, little bit of a cardio risk. Like I've been saying, if you think you can hedge out with Pickett live after that, also an option.
To me, Jamie Pickett just doesn't do anything. His best skill is cage pushing and holding people up against the fence, and that doesn't get scored anymore. He has a 5-inch reach advantage, will not make any use of it whatsoever. So another fight where we see, the fighter who needs to get inside with more power probably has a chance of clinching Pickett. Pickett's durability also seems to be going too. He used to be like a pretty durable guy who I would bet to go to a decision or at least survive. He doesn't seem to be able to take any damage anymore either. So yeah, I would want to lean to the over here, but it's over 2.5 at like juiced up. If this was over 1.5 minus 110, I'd probably bet the over, not at 2.5 juice to the over. No, thank you. So probably agree with you, Billy, on Anders to win inside the distance. And also Anders on the money line, frankly, minus 500. I think that should be minus 900. He's really like a 90% favorite in this fight. I'd probably use him as a parlay piece as well. I could see him, the only way you lose your bet, Billy, honestly, I think Anders has like fight IQ issues sometimes. And as you also said, the cardio stuff, I could see him landing like big damaging strikes and then clinching or going for a takedown. And you're just screaming at the TV, like, what are you doing? Just like square up and hit him. So he tends to do that stuff sometimes. Drives me nuts. I feel like the Darren Stewart fight, he had Stewart hurt and then was like shooting for takedowns. And you're like, what are you doing? So, yeah, interesting angle there. Expecting a fair amount of violence this week, I think. Despite all these big favorites, I bet a few overs. All the other fights, though, I think may end inside the distance. That'll do it for us for the UFC Vegas 87 betting preview presented by BetMGM. I'm Sean Zerillo. Thank you for joining me, Billy Ward. You can find all of our picks in the Action Network app. I'll be firing them in there before the card on Saturday. Best of luck with all of your bets. Card starts at 1:30 p.m. We'll see you next week.